Hi all, good evening and welcome everybody to Perio Masterclass. First of all, thank you once again everybody for the excellent response. We are receiving so much mails and I am first of all my apologies for not replying to everybody. I'll make it sure by this weekend I reply to everybody. Today we have the gorgeous Dr. Bianca with us and Rajiv Chittagupi sir obviously is with who is the brain behind the Perio Masterclass. I would like to invite Rajiv Chittagupi sir first on the stage. Good evening, sir, and welcome to the show.
Thank you, Abhishek. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the third episode of Perio Masters Class, brought to you by World Dental Association in collaboration with Perio India. I take great pleasure in introducing Dr. Bianca Nazaret Arya to you. Dr. Bianca completed her BDS from Government Dental College and Hospital Nagpur as a gold medalist, then went on to complete her MDS in periodontology from Dr. D.Y. Patil Dental College, Pune. Dr. Bianca worked as a senior lecturer in periodontics and implantology for 4 years before involving herself completely into private practice with an emphasis on periodontology and implantology. Dr. Bianca is a theatre artist, blogger, and an avid traveler. Today she will be lecturing on non-surgical periodontal therapy. Over to you, Dr. Bianca.
Good evening and
Thank,
welcome, ma'am.
thank you very much. I'm just going to share my screen. Right. Is my screen visible?
Yes.
Wonderful. So thank you very much for that wonderful introduction, Dr. Rajiv. And first of all, congratulations to the World Dental Association team, Abhishek and your colleagues, and Dr. Rajiv Chilkupi for this wonderful initiative of this Perio Masterclass. And I'd like to thank you for inviting me to speak on this. I'm hardly a master, but well, I will try. And today it's 9 p.m. It's the middle of a working week. It's the end of a long day. It's IPL season and it's dinner time. So usually people just need one of these excuses, one excuse not to listen to Perio. And here we have four. So I'm grateful to my audience, whoever they are, if they have put apart all these things and are still listening in. Either you must hate cricket or you must love Perio. Either way, I'm happy. Welcome to the lecture, and I hope today I'll be able to give you at least some points or some take home points which will increase your love for non surgical periodontal therapy. I know we all feel that we make too much of an issue about tissue, and in fact, this sentence itself has become a cliche of sorts. But we are tissue, and let's face it, without it, we are a pretty ugly sight. Periodontics, unfortunately, despite the importance of tissue, has long been languishing among the unglamorous fields of dentistry. And unfortunately, even periodontists themselves identify themselves as implantologists or soft tissue experts or hard tissue experts, while distancing themselves constantly from the core of our branch, and that is treatment of periodontal disease through periodontal therapy, and that too non-surgical periodontal therapy primarily. It is like that ugly mole that we want to hide. And the truth is that, let me give you an example. During this entire pandemic, in the middle of this lockdown, all of us kept posting pictures on Facebook and Instagram of, doing a little gardening and saying now being one with nature, or doing a spot of reading and saying catching up on my reading, or playing carom and showing family time. But the truth is, you and I both know that we spent 80 to 90% of that time during that lockdown doing jhadu, pocha, bartan, kapda. That is sweeping, swabbing, and cleaning utensils and clothes. Because that were essential services, essential things that we have to do. They may be unglamorous, but the truth is that they are absolutely essential, and there's no getting around it. Similarly, periodontal therapy is an essential part of dentistry, and no matter what we do and how much we like all the glamorous part of it, the fact is that this unglamorous part forms the core of dental treatment, and we cannot ignore it. Do you know what's the best part of non-surgical periodontal therapy? When you're doing implantology or you're doing endodontics or you're doing a class 2 composite, there is this huge armamentarium. There is a series of steps. Each step has to be followed in a certain order for a certain specific amount of time. You cannot change that order, you cannot change that time. You cannot use the 5mm drill before the 2mm. You cannot bond before you etch. You cannot leave an etchant on the tooth and go out and get a cup of coffee. You can't do that. If you do any of these steps wrong, you are setting yourself up for immediate or delayed failure, but for sure failure. And in fact, that failure might actually cause harm, not just failure of treatment to the patient and loss of finance, but actually cause harm. On the other hand, look at non-surgical periodontal therapy. It is really, really, really difficult to do a bad job. Extremely difficult to do a bad job. You need to take effort to do a bad job. Has a minimum armamentarium, and it requires much less time, much less focus. And even if you don't do a perfect job, even if you just remove 70 or 80% of the calculus and leave behind 20%, either because you didn't have time or because you couldn't access it, you will still have done no harm, and you would have still done something good for that patient. A badly done implant is worse than no implant, but a badly done scaling is still better than no scaling. And so, why wouldn't you want to invest time and energy on a procedure like this, which is always going to do good? Coming to the core of my presentation today, that I have 3 subjects to cover and 1 hour. Obviously, each of these is a very long presentation in itself, but I'm going to try to concise it and keep everything to in a way which can actually help you in your clinical practice. The first part of my presentation is ultrasonic scaling. Now, ultrasonic scaling, for the longest time, any non-surgical or any kind of scaling, we need to understand that what is the objective of it. And the objective of it is not the removal of tartar, it is the removal of biofilm, which is your plaque and bacteria. This is your objective. The removal of tartar, removal of any overhangs, removal of any plaque retentive factors is all towards this end. That is the disruption and the removal of your biofilm. Unless you've done this, no matter what else you've done, you've not served and not reached that objective. Now, with regard to ultrasonic and hand instrumentation, there are a lot of people who still swear by hand instrumentation, and they do a very good job of it. Unfortunately, the rest of us are not that skilled to be able to do hand instrumentation perfectly and in that much amount of time. And therefore, the ultrasonics have been a godsend for us. However, what do I use? Only ultrasonics or only hand or both? I think it's a personal choice. However, I will give you the advantages and disadvantages of both, and you can then make a decision which is the right choice for you. So ultrasonics, as compared to hand instrumentation, they do remove less root structure, which means they are more conservative of the root structure. They also cause less soft tissue trauma. They are less operator dependent, and they are less technique sensitive. They also have shorter treatment times. Unfortunately, they do leave a rougher root surface. They remove less root structure, but they leave a rougher root surface as compared to hand instrumentation. So what I personally prefer is to do the majority of the work with ultrasonics, and then wherever there is root surfaces involved, a little bit of hand instrumentation, very lightly, very mildly, just to make sure that you have a smooth root surface. The types of the scalers that are available are your piezoelectric, your magnetostrictive, and your sonic scalers. Sonic scalers are basically scalers that are attached to air turbine, and they have much less vibrations. We don't use them too much. I'm not going to speak much about sonic scalers and concentrate on magnetostrictive and the piezoelectric. We don't need to go into too much of the theory of this, but we basically should understand how they work so that you can better utilize these scalers and understand what are their advantages and disadvantages. Now, the magnetostrictive scalers, these are scalers which have a metal stack, and which, when an electromagnetic field is applied to it, it causes dimensional changes in that metal, which transmitted to the tip causes vibration of the tip. The piezoelectric scalars, instead of a metal stack, it has a crystalline structure, which when an electric field is applied to it, similarly, it will cause dimensional changes, and that is transmitted to the tip. The important difference which we need to understand, or rather, which used to be the difference, no longer is the stroke pattern of both. Throughout our college life, throughout our BDS, we have always been taught that the magnetostrictive scalars, the stroke pattern is elliptical, and the piezoelectric, it is linear. Why do we need to understand the difference and what is the stroke pattern? Because that will determine how we use the tips of these scalars. Now, if the stroke pattern is elliptical, which means every surface of your scalar tip then becomes active because the energy is directed on every surface. It is not concentrated on any one surface. Therefore, every surface of that scalar tip is active. In the piezoelectric scalars, we were always taught that the stroke pattern is linear, which means that only two surfaces the energy is concentrated on, the back and the front, which means if we use these two surfaces, we will be exerting an inordinate amount of energy onto the tooth surface and we may cause damage, which means we were advised to use only the two lateral surfaces of the scalar. However, those were light microscopy studies. The recent studies are all on 3D laser vibrometry, and they show that this stroke pattern is also elliptical in a piezoelectric scalar for a lot of their tips, which means that now we can use those tips in every surface of that particular tip. The contraindications, it is said that we are supposed to use magnetostrictive scalars with caution in patients with pacemakers, and in piezoelectric there's no such caution advised. For some reason in India, most of us use piezoelectric scalars, and those are the ones which are most marketed and most used in most clinics. What is the mechanism of action? Now, everybody at this point during BDS time, we shut our heads off. At this point, a light switch went off and we went into snooze mode. Nobody paid attention to why and how those scalars work because we felt it was unimportant. However, it is important to understand the mechanism of action so that you can fully utilize your device. Now, the first part and the second part, that is mechanical and irrigation, is very well known to us and we understand it and we know it. Mechanical means the actual vibration causes the fracture of the calculus and dislodges it. Irrigation is the lavage of the water spray, which causes it to wash away all the debris and at the same time give you a clear vision. The other two mechanisms, that is cavitation and acoustic microstreaming, this is something that is less understood or not even known to most general dentists. Now, what is cavitation and acoustic microstreaming? This is basically when these vibrations move through this water or your irrigant, it causes small little whirlpools of water, and those whirlpools are acoustic microstreaming. Within those whirlpools and around in that irrigant liquid, there are little bubbles formed, which when they implode, they cause a transmission of energy which can help in disruption of the biofilm. If this is all sounding very technical to you, let me see if this video will make things clear. I like to think and I like to imagine the plaque bacteria crying like that little baby, but that's wishful thinking. But I hope that video made it clear. There's a bubble, there's an implosion, and as soon as that bubble implodes, there is a disruption of whatever is around that bubble. Your operational variables of your scalar. Now, there are 3 operation variables, of which actually only 2 are in your hand to control. If you remember, when you are scaling, every time you reach tenacious calculus and when you feel that the scalar tip is not working efficiently enough, you tell your assistant, speed badao, increase the speed, and your assistant turns that dial on your machine and you feel that you have become more efficient because the speed has increased. However, speed, loosely translated speed, is actually frequency, which is the number of times your tip vibrates within a second, and that surprisingly is fixed. It is fixed for every machine. It cannot be changed by you. It is fixed at a resonant frequency, which is basically the frequency at which that machine performs best, consuming the least amount of power. And that is usually in the range of 25 to 40 kilohertz, which means that when you are changing that power setting on that power dial, you are not changing the frequency at all. So what are you changing? What you are changing is the displacement amplitude, which means the distance the tip travels. So if at setting 1, your tip is traveling from point A to point B, at setting 5, your tip is traveling from point A to point C in the same amount of time. This setting is not linear, which means every time you increase the power, it is not increasing by the same amount of displacement, is not occurring. However, it is increasing. So if in the same amount of time, your tip is moving that much more by a higher power setting, logically speaking, you should always be working at the highest power setting. Why would we ever want to work at a lower power setting? Well, again, surprisingly, the studies have shown that at medium to medium high, you get your optimum scaling. And increasing your displacement amplitude more than that does not help in any way with regard to the speed and the efficiency of the procedure. In fact, you may actually be causing some problems. For example, at a very high amplitude, because of the increased displacement of the tip, it will displace your irrigant fluid so much that it will cause aerosolization of that fluid, which means your fluid is going to be just an aerosol and it will not actually cool that tip, which means at a higher power setting, you are risking heating up that tip to a point where it can cause damage to the tooth. The third operation variable is your water flow rate. Now, the water flow rate, unfortunately, is the least utilized variable in your ultrasonic scaler. If you see most of the students using a scaler, or even for that matter, any doctor who is not very experienced, who doesn't understand the knowledge or the technicalities of a scaler, you will always find their scaler setting of the water spray at the minimum or at the low minimum, never at high. And why is that? Because most of them feel that the water spray interferes with either visibility, or it is irritating the patient, or it is the mouth is filling up and the patient is coughing on the irrigant liquid, etc., etc., etc. However, if you are not using that water spray, you are definitely at a disadvantage, which I will enumerate in the latter part of this lecture. How much water spray is the correct water spray? Unfortunately, the water spray doesn't come with number settings. It just comes from a low to a high setting, and you have to arbitrarily increase it. So how do you decide how much water spray is right? If you had a look at this video, you could see there's a fine mist around the scaler tip, which is the aerosol of that water spray caused by the vibration of the tip. At the same time, there were huge water droplets running down the scaler tip. Now, when you see this mist around the scaler tip as well as water droplets running down the scaler tip, that's when you know you have the right amount of water spray. That is the correct level at which you should be doing your scaling, which is almost always at a medium to a high level of water spray. You will never achieve this at a low level of water spray. So what are the cardinal sins of instrumentation using ultrasonics? The first is poor irrigation. This I find a most irritating and annoying thing, and I keep repeating this on and on. Irrigation is paramount in ultrasonic scaling. The first thing about losing visibility, all you need is suction. Patient getting irritated, well, patients get irritated with anything in dentistry. If you explain to them that this is important and it will cause sensitivity if I do not use enough irrigation, automatically they will feel less irritated when they realize it's for their benefit. The third thing is patients gagging or coughing on the irrigant liquid. One is, if your suction is powerful enough, this problem will not occur. But even if you do not have a very powerful suction, even if your patient is in supine position, you can adjust the headrest to be slightly upright so that the water doesn't pool at the back of the throat. Poor irrigation not only will cause severe sensitivity, but it will also lose out on the two factors of cavitation and microstreaming, which will actually affect your efficiency and slow down your process and increase the amount of time you need to spend on scale. The second cardinal sin is using worn tips. People invest so much in their clinics and so much on their machines and so much on their interiors, and surprisingly refuse to change scaler tips for years and years and years together. Part of the reason being is anything that is not plastic, I think we have some problem with being able to throw it away. We just can't throw away anything that looks like metal. Somehow we want to keep on using it till it cannot be used anymore. I understand that, but the truth is, if you are using worn tips, you are losing money, you are losing efficiency, you are losing chair time. You may even lose a patient because using a worn tip will increase your scaling time so much and increase the discomfort of your patient. How do you know that your scaler tip is worn? Every machine, every ultrasonic machine comes with a scaler tip card, and this card shows you when your scaler tip is worn or not. You have to keep your scaler tip against the card, and if the tip of the scaler is beyond that line or the blue line, it is at optimal efficiency. Anything below that, you are losing efficiency slowly, and below the red line, you are supposed to blindly discard that scaler. Again, if you are finding it very difficult to discard that scaler, keep it aside, autoclave it and keep it aside, and I will give you another use for it, just not scaling. So what is this other use for a worn tip? We all have those re-cementation patients who come in, patients whose crowns have been dislodged, and usually they come in with, the crown in a little steel dabba. I really wonder. I wonder if there's a supplier on Amazon whom he supplies these little steel dabbas for dislodged crown, because every patient with a dislodged crown always seems to have one of those. And in that steel dabba, you will find one tissue paper, and in that tissue paper gift wrap, you will find that old crown with the old cement, with 2 weeks of plaque and yesterday's dinner. Now that crown, what we usually do is take our air rotor to it and clean it out and then re-cement. But with that, though very efficient, we are also risking damaging the internal surface of the crown and changing the fit of the crown. This is where your worn tip of your scaler can come in use. Use that worn tip to clean that internal surface of the crown, which it does very efficiently without damaging the surface of the crown. That can be one use for your worn tip and nothing else in periodontics. The third cardinal sin of instrumentation using ultrasonics is the improper adaptation of the tip. Now, everybody who has been using hand scalers for the longest time, when they make that leap to ultrasonic scalers, they always think of ultrasonic scalers as hand scalers with power. So the first thing they do is to use the tip below, that is apical to the calculus, and try to dislodge it coronally, like you would a hand scaler. This is not how you are supposed to use it. In the hand scaler, you always go below the calculus and pull it upwards. With an ultrasonic scaler, you always go from the top or from the side downwards, slowly chipping away with the edge of the tip. If the calculus breaks away en bloc, that's a different matter, but otherwise you have to go top down, very slowly, gently chipping away at the target. You also have to adapt your tip in the following fashion. Generally, we like to do it obliquely, but the best way to adapt an ultrasonic scaler is vertically, parallel to the long axis of the tooth. This, studies have shown, provide the maximum cavitation and acoustic microstreaming, which means the additional benefit of those biophysical forces will be best when you use a tip in a vertical manner. In the interproximal regions, you can also use it in a horizontal manner, and the oblique manner of use is not completely obsolete. You can use it for certain situations, though this is the least preferred way of using the ultrasonic tip. And the last cardinal sin is excessive force. Now, when you use a hand instrument, you are using forces of approximately 15 to 20 newtons. When you're using an ultrasonic scaler, the force is approximately 0.5 to 2 newtons, which is 10 times to 20 times lesser. Now, obviously, we cannot measure when we are doing it, but very easily, if I have to tell you how to use it, it's basically in brush-like, feather-like strokes, just stroking the tooth very, very gently. Of course, it is understood that you're using a new tip. Only then this much amount of force will be adequate. Very briefly, the different types of tips for piezo scalers. These are the supragingival scaling tips. These tips come in various sizes, widths. Some of them are sharp tips, some of them have flat tips, some of them have rounded tips. The flat-ended tips are generally tips that are used for tenacious calculus. The round-ended tips are tips that are used generally for removing stains. You also have tips for subgingival debridement. Remember, whenever you are using tips in the subgingival region for debridement, each manufacturer will give you the ideal amount of the power setting, that is the displacement amplitude that you need to set it at. Generally, this is much less than your regular scale. The third kind of tip that is available for root planing and for burnished calculus, and that is diamond coated tips. These are tips you need to be very, very, very careful of, because you might end up really damaging the root surface if you are very aggressive with them. You also have dedicated tips for implant care, and these are plastic tips or titanium tips. And considering the amount of implants that are placed these days, these are tips that you almost surely will eventually need to have in your armamentarium. If not the ultrasonic version, then at least the hand instrument version of these. I'm not going to focus too much on the magnetostrictive scaler tips, but the profile of the tip remains the same. The handpiece looks a little bit different. What are the common issues, doubts with regard to ultrasonic scalers? The most common which patients come up with, and which also a lot of dentists feel, that ultrasonic scaling will cause a lot of post-operative sensitivity. As we saw earlier, contrary to popular belief, ultrasonic scalers are actually more conservative of root surface structure, which means they should be causing less sensitivity than your hand instruments. Ironically, that doesn't seem to be true, because a lot of people experience a lot of sensitivity. So why is that? First thing you need to do before you begin scaling is to identify pre-existing sensitivity. Please make sure to do this before scaling. Once you've identified that sensitivity, make sure to identify the cause of it. Is it attrition, abrasion, abstraction, caries, whatever it be? You need to identify it so that your procedure is not blamed for it. The second thing is to identify intraoperative sensitivity while scaling. Now, when you are scaling, you will realize that certain teeth are always a little sensitive, and some much more than others. Once you identify the sensitivity, then you have to deal with it. Now, in the next slide, I will come to how you can deal with the sensitivity. And you need to prepare your patient for this particular just a second. The second thing is disinfectants with scaling. Now, when you are there are a lot of people who want to use disinfectants with scaling, like povidone iodine or chlorhexidine. However, the studies have clearly shown no additional benefits. Personally, I do not use them at all. The reason is they really interfere with visibility. That brown povidone iodine liquid, as it is, it tastes terrible. Plus, it interferes with visibility, and I don't want any such issue while I am scaling. So I never use them. And the last thing is unrealistic expectations and myths. These are the what patients carry to the clinic, and you need to identify them and make sure that they have the right expectations before you do this procedure on them. Those who have already undergone it, it's not an issue. But those who are doing scaling for the first time, you need to sit with them and make them understand whether their teeth will brighten or not. There will be no change in color, which stains are going to come out, which stains are not going to come out. Please do not promise them that your teeth are going to be sparkling white, and then you realize all of them are intrinsic stains, and then you take your burr and try to remove them. Please don't do that. Make sure you diagnose it properly so that you explain it to your patient properly. Now, how to make the procedure more comfortable? Now, the easiest way to make the procedure most comfortable is to give local anesthesia. But local anesthesia, when you give, you remember we are going to do the whole mouth, and it is not practical to anesthetize the entire mouth. I would prefer very, very, very sensitive teeth. Of course, you will still need to give local anesthesia, but you should attempt to make the scaling procedure more comfortable by the tips that I'm about to give you. The first is to begin with the least sensitive area. It seems like a no-brainer, and yet whenever we begin scaling, where do we begin? With the lower anterior teeth. Almost always. It's instinctively the first teeth we go to. Why? Because those are the teeth with the maximum amount of tartar usually. And those are the teeth that are also the most sensitive. And so you are beginning with the most sensitive teeth. So at once the patient is on guard for the rest of the procedure. And then he starts wincing even with less sensitive teeth. So always begin with the least sensitive teeth, and those are usually your molars, either maxillary or mandibular, and they are the ones which will not cause too much sensitivity, and those are the teeth you should start with. The second is to flit from tooth to tooth if required. Now, whenever we have, right from college days, we've been told to begin from the end of one quadrant and then move our way around, and then begin the next quadrant and move our way around, so that we do not skip any tooth, do not leave out any surface. And this is an excellent protocol. However, if the patient is a very cooperative patient with no sensitivity, this is a wonderful way to do it and a very, very practical way to do it. However, if the patient is one of those sensitive patients and who are constantly wincing and moving around, a good idea would be to flit from tooth to tooth. Flit from a tooth that is very sensitive to a tooth that is non-sensitive. So, for example, you would scale a lower anterior, jump to a molar. Go back to the lower anterior, go to the premolar. Go back to the lower anterior, go back to the molar. A little scaling on the sensitive tooth, and then go back to another tooth which is not sensitive. How does this make sense? Surprisingly, it works. It does make sense. Because when you concentrate all your effort on one tooth, which is highly sensitive, that tooth is progressively getting more and more sensitive, and the patient is getting more and more uncomfortable, and he is anticipating more and more pain as the procedure continues, which causes him to wince more, move around more, and basically interferes with your procedure. However, when he gets a little shock of the sensitivity, and then almost before he can react, you've already moved to another tooth. He doesn't have time to react, and you go back to that tooth. Again, he gets a little shock, but you've gone back to another tooth. What happens here is the patient slowly comes to realize that there will be sensitivity, but it is going to be there only for a microsecond. And therefore, even when I feel it, I need not worry, because it's going to go away in a second. And surprisingly, even the most uncooperative of patients cooperate when you work like this. Use new tips. Again, if you want scaling to be comfortable, fast, efficient, do not compromise on this. You absolutely need new efficient tips. Another thing is supporting the lower anteriors. Now, we all know that when the teeth are mobile, we are supposed to support those teeth, and we all do that. But lower anterior teeth, which are very sensitive, even when they are firm, I always place a finger on the labial surface of the lower anteriors while I'm scaling on the lingual surface. When I support those teeth, the vibration transmission of through my scalar tip somehow is less through those dentinal tubules, and somehow it helps those teeth feel less sensitive. Of course, feather-like strokes, absolutely light, gentle. It's like almost like you're painting a picture. Use a disclosing agent. I know that calculus is very visible, stains are very visible, biofilm is less visible, but to an experienced operator, even that is very easy to spot and clean. Why I recommend using a disclosing agent in most cases is because once you use a disclosing agent, you automatically tend to concentrate your efforts on the areas that need scaling. And there are very few strokes of your scaler on non-involved areas, thereby reducing your time of scaling, also saving your tips from constantly being used on hard enamel where there is no biofilm and there is no tartar. So this disclosing agent shows you exactly and precisely where you need to concentrate your efforts. Polish first and at the end. Very strange. I'm not talking about air polishing, I'm talking about basic polishing, that is your pumice and your rubber cup or your bristle brush. This is something I follow. I know it's not a mandatory rule. It is something I follow and it helps me. I'll tell you how. So what happens is a lot when a patient comes in for scaling, a lot of it is tartar, some of it is biofilm, some of it is very light stains, some of it is soft food debris. When we start with scaling with your ultrasonic scalers, no doubt you're removing tartar, but by default you are trying to remove all the soft debris, the soft biofilm, the stains, everything, which increases your scaling time and increases the wear of your scaler tip. Now, if you polish first, you have removed your biofilm, most of it, you've removed all that soft debris, and a lot of times the very light tea coffee stains which are caused by food or mouthwashes, they all are eliminated by your polishing, which means that when you actually come to the scaling part of it, you have much less work to do, therefore making the procedure shorter and more comfortable, and also saving on your scaler tip. And at the end of it, of course, you must go back and polish a little bit more to make sure there are no rough surfaces and if you have missed any biofilm. Water, 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 plenty of water. Please don't scrounge on water. And suction, suction, suction. Now, very strangely, a lot of us think of suction as only suctioning the irrigant liquid, but no, we are also suctioning all that blood that is going to be there mixed with saliva and the irrigant in the patient's mouth while scaling a very inflamed um, uh, when scaling inflamed gingiva. Patients have 5 liters of blood in their body, but that 2 tablespoons of blood that they will spit out into the spittoon, they seem scandalized, miserable, and feel that they are going to die for sure based on those 2 tablespoons of blood. So, do not let them see it. A lot of patients come to me and they tell me, "Oh, wonderful scaling. My When you did this scaling, there was no bleeding at all, and my previous dentist, there was so much of bleeding, he must have been injuring me so much." The truth is there was same amount of bleeding when I was scaling in this patient as well, because the gingiva is that inflamed. The only difference is that I suctioned it all out before I allowed him to rinse his mouth or spit. Therefore, when he spat or when he rinsed his mouth, there was just a droplet or two and he couldn't make out, which reinforced his faith in me and also made my spittoon much less messy. That brings me to the end of the first part of the presentation, right on time. And the next 2 parts are much shorter because they also, in the order and the scheme of things in periodontics, they are also less important. Local drug delivery. Now, local drug delivery, when we talk about antimicrobials, there are many ways in which this antimicrobials can be carried to the periodontal pocket. It could be either through mouth rinses and toothpaste, it could be local irrigation, it could be systemic antibiotics, and it could be local, sustained and controlled local drug delivery. So, why are we focusing on local drug delivery? Because we need these three criteria to be fulfilled. We need the drug to reach up and penetrate a pocket more than 4 millimeters. We need an adequate amount of the drug within that pocket. And we need that drug to be present there for an adequate duration of time to be effective. Now, mouth rinses and toothpaste, they fail on all three counts. There's absolutely no value for them in pockets more than 4 millimeters. They have no help. They can only help in controlling the plaque and biofilm above, that is supragingival. Irrigation, local irrigation with the help of a syringe. Yes, absolutely. It can penetrate a pocket more than 4 millimeters. It can reach adequate concentration there. However, it cannot remain there for an adequate duration of time, because the moment you stop irrigating is the moment at which the irrigant and that antimicrobial ceases to be present in the pocket. Antibiotics, they do penetrate, they do reach adequate concentration with certain drugs, and they do remain there for an adequate duration of time, not too much, but they are better performing than the other two. And the last, the local drug delivery, that is where our focus is, and that passes on all the three counts. So what are the drugs that can be used for local drug delivery? One is chlorhexidine, one is the tetracycline group, and the third is metronidazole. Easily available in India, chlorhexidine and the tetracycline fibers. All the others not available here. The chlorhexidine comes in the form of a little chip. It has 2.5 mg of chlorhexidine embedded in it, and this chip has to just be inserted into the pocket after mechanical therapy, and over the course of 7 to 10 days, chlorhexidine is slowly released within the pocket, and thereby affecting the microorganisms over there. This chip then it can be replaced every 3 weeks, and it does seem to suppress flora for a long duration of almost 10 to 11 weeks. That's what some of the studies show. The other mode of local drug delivery is tetracycline fibers. These are fibers embedded with the tetracycline, which, just like a retraction cord, have to be slowly inserted into the periodontal pocket. The retraction cord, as you all know, it takes some time and some skill. Similarly, these fibers take even more time and skill, because we are trying to insert them deep down within the pocket. It's not enough to just put one single fiber around the tooth or the circumference of a tooth. We need to make sure there are many layers within that pocket. After you insert this, you may put a dressing or not, but generally they're supposed to be self-retentive. These fibers, they claim to be resorbable, though some brands, they need to be removed as well after a couple of weeks. The other drugs that are available are doxycycline, minocycline, metronidazole, all in the forms of syringes, pastes, gels, which can be inserted within the pocket. And once in the pocket, they tend to be self-retentive and release the drug over a period of a few days to a few weeks. Now, what are the advantages of local drug delivery? Obviously, the first and the major advantage would they bypass the systemic side effects of antibiotics. They there's increased concentration of the drug in the area of interest. Patient compliance is better in the sense, as compared to an antibiotic or systemic drug, where you have to rely on the patient to take the drug at the right time for the right number of days. In this, you are seeing the patient yourself, and therefore you are making sure that the drug is delivered in the pocket at the right time. It also treats only the affected sites and leaves all the other sites, all the other periodontal pockets, without any drug. However, they do have some disadvantages. You have an increased number of visits of the patient, because each time the patient needs to visit for inserting a new dose of the drug. All extra pocket sites are not addressed. Biofilm does not accumulate just on teeth and supra and subgingival. It also is present on mucosa, on your tongue, on other sites, and when these sites are not treated, there can be recolonization of the pocket through bacteria from those sites. It is also more expensive naturally, because those number of, not only the number of visits but also the number of dosage of those drugs which have to be inserted at regular intervals. There is known drug resistance to some of these drugs now, not surprisingly considering all the abuse. So they have no longer, their efficacy is now questionable in certain situations. Also, the chlorhexidine chip, even the tetracycline fibers, there has been reports of inflammation, discomfort, toothache in the site where these drugs have been administered. The final part of my presentation, systemic antibiotics. Now, systemic antibiotics is my pet peeve. When Dr. Rajiv asked me to speak on this, I almost felt like telling him that I'll speak on the first two and skip this part. But I thought this is also a good opportunity to air my views on the subject, so I may as well speak on it. Systemic antibiotics is, to me, wishful thinking in periodontics, because we just want to find a solution which is simple, concise, compact, inexpensive, and with minimal effort it will treat us. In fact, we love our drugs so much that we are ready to believe anybody who tells us. If someone comes tomorrow and says that this drug will cure your cough, cold, fever, corona, it will cure you, cure your obesity, cure your fat, give you eternal youth, and help you with your relationship with your mother-in-law, we will probably eat that drug. We'll believe it, because we are so eager for an easy way out for everything that we are ready to take anybody on their word with regard to a little pill. But the truth is far from it, and we both know, and we all know. Antibiotics are only an adjunct in very, 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 very select cases. I would say in acute periodontal conditions where systemic spread is likely or space infections are feared, maybe we can use antibiotics. Not in a periodontal abscess, no, absolutely not. There are many times I have seen and have asked patients what is the first line of treatment with for a periodontal abscess, and the students would come back with the answer, antibiotics. Absolutely not. An abscess first line of treatment will always and forever remain drainage and scaling and mechanical therapy, not antibiotics. Antibiotics, in fact, have no role there at all. If drainage is established adequately, you probably don't need it also. Yes, if there is a space infection, if the systemic spread is likely, if the patient is extremely immunocompromised and he has this kind of an abscess, then perhaps we may consider, but otherwise, absolutely not. We would use it in aggressive periodontitis patients or patients with refractory periodontitis not responding to any kind of mechanical or local drug therapy, patients with a specific microbiological profile, patients where that microbiological profile has been tested and identified to be responsive to these antibiotics. Yes, absolutely, I would say that would be the right choice. Again, as an adjunct. No oral hygiene, no antibiotics. I mean, it's such a no-brainer, but I still feel I should write this out here on the slide because we just love our antibiotics so much. I lectured just this morning in GDC, and I spoke on this particular topic. I had another topic, but I had to touch upon this topic as well. And I was relating a story of once I had a patient who came to me with a prescription which had 14 drugs on it. 14 drugs. It had amoxiclav, it had doxycycline, it had metronidazole, it had a couple of painkillers, NSAIDs, it had antacids, it had probiotics, it had serratiopeptidase, it had B complex, it even had antioxidants. And I think that the doctor stopped writing any more drugs because he ran out of that prescription paper, not because he didn't have more drugs to add. And that prescription represented to me everything that is wrong in dentistry. It reeks of laziness and incompetence and irresponsibility and greed and lack of knowledge, because there are only two types of people who need to rely on a prescription like that: either people who are underconfident with regard to their diagnosis and thereby by extension their treatment planning, or the other kind of people who they do not have any confidence on the execution of that treatment plan. So it's either a lack of knowledge or a lack of clinical skill. Only those kind of clinicians need to rely on a prescription like that or a crutch like that. Please understand, if you have not removed and eliminated the basic cause of the periodontal disease, that is the biofilm, and you have not established adequate oral hygiene measures, if the patient is not cooperating with regard to oral hygiene, what antibiotics are going to do there? What antibiotics are going to work there? Why would you waste your time, energy, money, and the patient's money on antibiotics, and while risking all those other side effects? I know I seem very passionate about this issue. But still, for the sake of completion of this lecture, I'm going to enumerate the various dosages and the names of the antibiotics that have been used in periodontics: amoxicillin, metronidazole, doxycycline, azithromycin, and ciprofloxacin. These are the single dose regimens that are used to treat periodontal diseases. They have not shown too much of effectiveness currently because of the bacterial resistance that has popped up. So now we have moved on to combination drugs, that is amoxicillin and metronidazole, or ciprofloxacin and metronidazole, again to be used with caution, with understanding, after having established oral hygiene and done everything possible to treat that patient, and only then you move on to a drug like this. So look for reasons not to prescribe antibiotics. And every time you feel like you're itching, your hand is itching to write a prescription, just try to visualize this picture. In our war against periodontal disease, we should not forget the collateral damage that is caused by antibiotics, because there is damage. Every time we think of prescribing antibiotics, we think, what side effects? Nausea, vomiting, gastritis, a little bit of uneasiness, a little bit of heartburn. That's about it. I mean, and that will last for a few days and that's it, right? But no. Please remember, you are not the only one prescribing antibiotics. You are not the only person giving this patient medication. This patient is taking medication for other systemic conditions. This patient is, over his lifetime, he will take multiple courses of antibiotics from various physicians for various things. And all of that has reached a point where in just 70 years, we have degrees of bacterial resistance that where important life-threatening diseases aren't being cured because there is just so much of multi-drug resistance that is prevalent. Also, another very less understood thing is that these antibiotics cause a dysbiosis of the gut, which means not just vomiting and nausea for a few days. It means that it changes your gut flora to the point where now you are more prone to various chronic autoimmune diseases, atherosclerosis, chronic infections of the lung, obesity, various other health risks. Now, all of this to treat periodontal disease. Now, if I told you that you could possibly get a whole host of autoimmune diseases, disorders of the gut, obesity, atherosclerosis, lung infections, and bacterial resistance, but if you take this medicine, you will get 0.5 millimeter of attachment gain and 0.5 millimeter decrease in probing depth. Maybe, not even confirmed, maybe. Would you want to take this medicine? I'll take my chances with periodontal disease. So unless we come to the point where we are able to develop a drug which can predictably give us dramatic changes in clinical attachment gain and in probing depth, until then, I think we should limit our prescriptions to the bare minimum, absolute bare minimum. With that, I have almost come to the end of my presentation, and I'm going to leave you with one thought. When you wake up in the morning and you know that you have a full mouth implant case, or you have a very complicated multi-rooted endodontic case, or you have a very difficult class 2 composite restoration, you wake up with this. Depending on the kind of person you are, either you wake up very nervous, or you wake up with at least some degree of stress somewhere at the back, where constantly you're running your mind through all the protocol, the armamentarium. You're thinking about what I have to do, how I have to do it, is everything ready, etc., etc., etc. On the days that you wake up and you know that all you have scheduled for that morning is a case of scaling, do you feel different? I'm sure you do. Do you feel stressed? Do you feel in any way worried? Absolutely not. So my suggestion to all my prosthodontist friends, to my oral surgeon friends, to my endodontist friends, to my general dentist friends, in the middle of a heavy day, when you have a veneer case on one end and an implant case on the other end, just put in a scaling case in between. It is paid meditation. Someone is paying you to meditate, and at the same time you're doing good. So just I hope this lecture was informative as well as interesting, and I hope you're taking you away from your IPL match and dinner was beneficial to all of you, and it was fun lecturing, though I can't see anybody, and it does feel like a post-apocalyptic world where I'm just sending out Morse code messages into the universe and hoping someone will reply. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, ma'am. It was a wonderful presentation. And I can see somebody who can really compare scaling with meditation.
It is for me at least.
The more you love your profession, obviously, it is everything. Ma'am, we have few questions.
Thank
you. If you have some time, can we take some? First question is from Dr. Shweta. How is frequency and displacement amplitude not connected?
See, so like I said, frequency is fixed. We can't change that. So in an ideal scenario, you should be able to change your frequency as well as your displacement amplitude. But for most machines, this is fixed, and your displacement amplitude is what you can control. Now, at the back of the machine, I'm sure the machine itself is monitoring and changing in minor ways that frequency to adjust to that displacement amplitude. So you cannot do it, but your machine is automatically adjusting it so that it works at a proper resonant frequency and gives you the optimal efficiency.
Next question is from Dr. Kim Preet. Can you please tell me the brands of scaling tips and periods for implants?
Okay, so again, I'm not being paid by anybody and any company to speak either for or against. But I have always been an Acteon user for the longest time, from the very beginning of my practice till now. And I have always used all of Acteon scaler tips. So you could use that, but I'm sure all the other machines in the market also supply these tips these days, but this is what I prefer to use.
Next question is from Victor Castro. Is it ideal to use anesthesia
for scaling? So, like I said, mentioned in my lecture, using anesthesia is the easy way out. Okay, because when you give anesthesia to a patient, you are sure he's going to be comfortable. But one, it is impractical because you cannot anesthetize the entire mouth, and it will be very uncomfortable for the patient. However, even if you do that, the second disadvantage in giving anesthesia is that you do not know you do not get any patient feedback. So if you are a little too aggressive or injuring the patient, You will only come to know after the anesthesia is gone off and the patient calls you at 11 in the night saying he's in acute pain and has too much of sensitivity. So for me personally, I always prefer to try to work without anesthesia for scaling and even for light subgingival scaling, which is not too deep, because I get a little bit of feedback from the patient with regard to how my handling is.
Next question is from Dr. Mamta Patil. What are the extra precautions do you recommend in COVID-related scenario for oral prophylaxis?
Okay, so I should have anticipated this question. The same precautions that you would use for anything in dentistry, according to me, and this is a pet question of for Dr. Rajiv. He would love to answer this. Your scaling procedure is not more or less scary than any other procedure in dentistry. Till now, the aerosol in your scaler, produced by your scaler, hasn't proven to contain that virus. That is according to the research that has been done by Dr. Rajiv. So, however, just to be on the safe side, I would recommend the same that you would use for an aerota handpiece, the same kind of precautions, that is your N95 mask, your face shield, your eyewear, and whatever else you could use to protect yourself, head cap, etc. And try to make sure that after you finish scaling, that you dispose most of it, which is disposable, and thoroughly clean the rest of it. Oh yes, and one more thing. You'd ask the patient to do a pre-procedural mouthwash, a thorough mouthwash with either concentrated chlorhexidine or povidone iodine.
Rajiv sir has covered this topic in his first lecture.
Yes, I know. I'm sure he will have something to say about that again.
Next question is from Dr. Sai Kalyan. Can you elaborate on the size and material aspects of abrasive particles used in polishing paste?
Yes, so the air abrasion systems that are used, in those the particle size varies vastly from 40 to 25 to even 14 microns now. So if you are using an air abrasion system of where you are able to use a particle size of only 14 microns, in that case you'll be able to efficiently remove biofilm without any fear of causing any tooth damage. The moment we increase the particle size beyond 40 microns and more, you are at once risking removing too much tooth structure, too much root structure, and in thereby damaging the tooth. So I'm a little wary about this, but be careful. Make sure that your particle size is somewhere below this, and try to use the finest possible grit with regard to pumice, so that you do not damage the tooth structure.
Okay. Now we have few questions regarding medicines. Do you usually prescribe patients post flap surgery? What do you usually prescribe?
I know I'm going to be, I don't know, there will be a lot of controversy on the subject, but I don't really prescribe anything other than a painkiller to a patient. So pre flap surgery, depending on the patient, I would give him a dose of antibiotic, so maybe 2 grams of amoxicillin, but that's about it. That's just pre-surgical precaution. Post-surgical, no antibiotics. Painkiller would be one SOS. On the first day, I would encourage him to take it. From day 2, most of my patients don't take even painkillers.
Can we use anesthetic gel as an adjunct for patient during scaling?
Anesthetic gel, yeah, that is more for your own satisfaction. I don't think it helps in any way. Yeah. We just feel better, and when we tell the patient that we are going to put a gel and then do it, they also somehow psychologically feel more reassured. But come on, think about it. The scaler tip, it's not going to cause any decrease in sensitivity because you're not anesthetizing the tooth. And a scaler tip, like I just enumerated in one of my slides, compared to a hand instrument, it causes much less soft tissue damage. So when you are touching that soft tissue, it hardly damages that soft tissue and doesn't cause any problem. So it, I don't think it is essential, but if you wish, you can just apply a little bit.
I'll take just 2 questions if you have time. Last
Sure. I'm sorry, I'm a little distracted. Just I had to give somebody a
I can understand that. Why titanium tips for implants debridement?
Yeah, so the stainless steel tips supposedly cause too much rough surfaces on the implant, causes changes in the implant surface, and would attract more plaque and debris on that surface. So using a tip that is say the same material as the implant itself is supposed to be more effective and cause less surface damage, and thereby ensuring that those their more effective job is done.
Ma'am, there are some plastic tips also available, I suppose, from your
Yes,
end.
they are, and to be honest, if you are just removing biofilm, um, they are effective. But compared to the titanium tips, I've heard that they're less. And but one more thing, I have a few friends of mine who have been using this, and one of them did tell me that these tips are very, very fragile, the titanium tips. So you need to use them with a little care.
One question which every general practitioner is facing every day: how to remove heavy stains from patients who are chronic smokers?
Yeah. So the first thing is the patient who has chronic smokers, some of their stains have become almost intrinsic. Okay, the stains which are in the crack lines of their teeth, the stains which are on their occlusal surfaces, it's almost going to be impossible to remove. So before you begin your procedure, only you need to tell that patient that this is not going to come out. Okay. Number two, if the stain is on top of tartar, that's good news, because tartar comes out, the stain comes out with it. The stain which is purely stain and there is absolutely no tartar, those are the tough stains. And those stains with the round ended flat tip, they can be removed. But please remember that if there's no tartar and no biofilm, purely stain removal is for an aesthetic purpose. So don't
Yes.
go all ninja onto that teeth. Understand that the ones which are in the line of visibility are the ones which are absolutely important. The ones which are at the back of the mouth and there are few stains, no biofilm, no tartar, please don't go aggressively onto those stains. It's okay, just leave it. Again, you could use an air abrasive system which they claim can remove it, but if you don't possess one, then in that case, just gently with your regular flat ended or a round ended flat tip, use that to remove the stain.
I'll take this as last question from Dr.
Sure.
Monica. Please enlighten us regarding controlling post-scaling sensitivity plus potent stain removal if you can
No,
recommend.
I'm sorry. I just heard the first part. Enlighten us with regard to handling post-scaling sensitivity
Sensitivity
and
and a potent stain remover if we can use any.
stain remover.
Yes.
Your potent stain remover is your ultrasonic scaling tip. Nothing else. Please do
Actually, she's
not
asking
use
about chemical.
hydrogen peroxide. Do not use any chemicals, hydrogen peroxide, your handpiece burr, your micromotor burr. Please do not use them on stains. You will end up damaging your tooth surface. At the very least, you will end up causing so much of micro roughness that within a few weeks, all that stain will be back. So, like I said, there is absolutely no need to go ninja on tips on stains. Just enough to cause an aesthetic issue, to remove the aesthetic issue. With regard to the post-operative sensitivity, like I just said during my lecture, identify what is the usually patients who have extreme post-operative sensitivity usually had sensitivity to begin with, and that sensitivity is almost always with regard to attrition, abrasion, erosion, abfraction, or gingival recession. And these are things that need to be dealt with independently on their own. They will not be increased or decreased by your scaling. They will not be helped by applying any desensitizing agent. With regard to intraoperative sensitivity, which you are, if you have caused that intraoperative the sensitivity, you need to make sure that your technique is modified so that you do not cause it in the first place, which means adequate irrigant, light strokes, new tips, support the teeth, and be careful. If worst case scenario you do cause some amount of sensitivity, if you have been careful, that sensitivity will definitely be reversible within a few days. And if just for the sake of reassuring the patient, you can advise a desensitizing toothpaste or apply a lot of these desensitizing agents that you get in the market like Cepridon's, Isodan, or etc., where you can just paint it on the tooth. But remember, if you have been aggressive with your scaling, that sensitivity will not go away. So your technique is what should be the most important, and not the cover up operation.
Thank you so much, ma'am. More questions are pouring in. I am sure they will be covered in the next series of the masterclass. Thank you
Okay.
so much for your valuable time. It was a wonderful, amazing lecture. Despite I am working from last 15 years, I am still learning new things every day in all these webinars. Thank you so
Thank you
much.
so much.
Many
Thank
doubts
you.
cleared about, and
Thank
thank you
you.
much to all.
I enjoyed myself.
Thank you so much. And see you all next Wednesday with Dr. Shalu Chandna, ma'am. The topic will be flap surgeries and for pocket elimination. Thank you so much, everybody. Stay tuned. I will be posting the questionnaire in a while and you can just fill it up. And please remember, certificate will be issued only if you attend all the questionnaires and get minimum qualifying marks. Thank you so much, everybody. Bye bye. Good night.